Hello and welcome to the fifth episode on catalyzing radical systemic change. The topic today is debunking. Meditation is a panacea for everything. And I know I did not even agree with my two guests on the header, but I will put it a little bluntly. There's a famous Zen quote which says, if you see the Buddha, kill him. And I have the feeling this is a good start into our conversation today, because there's a couple of meanings. So when you dive deeper into the meaning of the quote, one is, if you see the Buddha out there, kill him, because the Buddha can't be out there, because that which is always ever present, like the Buddha nature in you and us and all of us, can't be out there. So that's the original, let's say, meaning from the Zen quote. The other one that I would like to highlight for today's dialogue is, I have the feeling we literally need to kill meditation as it's often put out there on a billboard as a meditation, as a panacea for stress and burnout prevention, to be more successful, to earn more money, to whatever. And for that, we need to unpack the concept to get a better understanding what different types of meditations exists in the different cultural backgrounds, and also where this, let's call it, eternal gem of meditation can shine forth, but also nuance it where it might be best complemented with other techniques for personal development. With that super teeny tiny blurb, I'm happy to hand over to Felix Hoch. And yeah, Felix, I'm kindly asking yourself to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on your person, and obviously also link it to the topic of our dialogue today.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, first of all, for the invitation to the podcast. May I ask, is it more a 1 minute introduction, self-introduction, or how deep do you like us to go?
Let's make it anything between 1 to 3 minutes, maybe, because I have the feeling we will dive deeper into our journeys as human beings attached to the topic later. But it does not need to be super short.
All right. Yeah. First of all, I'm happy to call myself a friend of yours. Regarding the topic, I guess what made me interested for participating in your podcast is the fact that I have a mixture of a meditation practice since the 90s, then also exposure to integral theory and practice. I had studied in Munich comparative religion with a focus on mainly Japanese Buddhism, Japanology, and philosophy. And during the last couple of years, entering the professional life, so I'm really interested how to bring mindfulness practices, meditation practice into my work as facilitator, coach, and moderator. I think this is good for the start, and I'll hand it over to Nicolas.
Thank you, Felix. I think that Japan is also where I want to start. I once did a half a year exchange over there in Japan, and that's where I found myself in a society where meditation and mindfulness was kind of practiced and eaten with the breakfast, drunk with the tea. And I stumbled into a class by a beautiful professor that kind of started my interest and also become a mentor of mine in my own quest into wisdom, traditions, and also meditation. And I think ever since I went on a quest to understand it on a theoretical level, but also to practice, to go into long-term retreats and And with a little detour to the European Parliament, where I was 3 years working there as an advisor, I now teach meditation in Berlin at a really beautiful, almost spaceship-like meditation center called OHEA. And there we give like longer workshops on like where can I be, where am I on that journey of meditation, etc. But I also, as a coach right now, I help organizations and also leaders to understand themselves better and to be more aligned. So in some ways to bring this old wisdom also back into the real world, and it's something that brings me a lot of joy. And that's why I'm also really looking forward to this conversation today. Yeah.
So maybe as a starting point for our dialogue today, I want to unpack the headline of meditation, because I certainly know that from my personal experience, it took me, I'd say, half a decade, so a good 5 years, starting with 17 with yoga and concentrative meditative practices, and then switching consciously after a very intense peak experience to Vipassana and Zen meditation, that I found out that there is no such thing seemingly as one meditation technique, more like a plethora, like a richness of meditation techniques from diverse cultural backgrounds. So to frame that as a question is, can we give our audience some broad categories or buckets or drawers or categorizations into which certain meditation techniques fall? And I'm not addressing this technique to any one of the two of you specifically, but really asking like into the space in between the three of us.
Nicholas, you want to take that?
When I started meditation, and I peeked into many different traditions, and I often, or like even like small groups, and I often found this one answer or this one theme going around is like, this practice that we do here is the right one. So almost an orthodoxy, orthos being the right way. And that seemed really weird to me. And on the way now, I understand why this is so weird. It's because there are different meditation techniques. And meditation, let's unpack it. What is meditation? It's just, in its most basic way, it's just a way to train. It's just a overarching theme of different techniques that train the mind, right? And so I found a beautiful paper, I think it was by Dahl Davidson and Richard Davidson and Lutz. And they actually did all the work, the scientists, to categorize the different styles of meditation. And once I found this, I was like, oh, finally, because finally we can understand now which different styles of meditation train which part of the brain. And what they actually said is, once there's kind of more mindful, focused attention practices, which is kind of, they train your focus, and those are like the things you need to kind of really start off. It's like that is the wind that gets the plane off the ground so you can start to work. And there you have all different kinds of practices inside that. You know, you have what some would call shamatha practices where you just focus your attention on either your breath or like a candle. It's just many different ways, you know. But then there's also loving kindness practices that really train your mind, to the plasticity of your mind, to be more loving, and to change also the script of your mind of how you perceive the world. And those are really, really beautiful. Like those are you have Tonglen practice, metta practice, etc. And as a third one, you have more insight practices practice that train your capacity to understand how your mind works and make sense of the world, like metacognitive practices. Those are usually at the end of the journey, but it's also really worthwhile to start the journey there and then to reconstruct it. I mean, that's just a little taster into the different styles or categories of meditation that I find really, really useful. Because if you go to the gym, right, you don't have it that you don't have a person that tells you you only need to train your arms. You actually need to train your mind in all its different facets. And only training your focus, for example, will not make you more compassionate. And this is why I advocate for now that we start with mindfulness, let's delve into the beauty, the joy of all those different practices.
Yeah, I may add, or I can add from my personal practice journey. I'm mainly was mainly Zen practitioner for most of the year, for most of my life. And interestingly, Zen is very, very stubborn or radical in looking at different meditation approaches, because it emphasizes that the most important question about the practice path is the question or the desire to wake up. And the most important thing is just to look into who you are. And of course, during the journey, different aspects of meditation unfold, but it doesn't indulge in this cross training and have multiple practices approach, like say the Tibetan Buddhism. And for myself, I was on that practice path myself for a lot of years before I realized that I was lacking a couple of things that stood in my way, and that I needed to live a good life in society as a lay person, as a secular person, and that broadened my perspective to meditation, and that not even within the realm of Buddhist meditation, but complementing it with other aspects, especially prayer and heart meditation in general. So the multitude of spiritual practices can be, of course, looked at from a systematic point of view, but also from point of view of just unfolding what's necessary for you, or where you feel that your own practice path is not satisfying you, or is not keeping you on the track that you want to be.
I want to riff off the three broad categorizations that Nicholas brought in, and I would like if Nicholas, keeps repeating them. My biggest aha moment was actually reading a very small book from Osho, this Bhagwan, free Russianish guy that died in the 90s, like 1990, which is called The Orange Book. And it shows more than 80 different meditation techniques in all variety. So it kind of gives you a glimpse on what meditation could look like in everyday life, when you're swimming, when you're walking, when you're at the gym, when you're sitting still, when you have your eyes open. So I'm really curious, Nicholas, to listen in where these broad categories still sit, because I truly also have the feeling we first need to train our attention. You were giving the metaphor of the wind to lift the plane, to then unfold in maybe more complex practices. Yeah, so just curious to explore that together.
Yeah, so in a way, meditation is also a bit of a, once a word is being picked up from one field and then enters the mainstream, it just becomes a everyone's word. And then some people also start to use it that have never used it in their own different ways, you know. So suddenly eating a burger is meditative, you know. Suddenly going hunting is a meditation. And it might seem almost, you know, absurd from the, you know, maybe traditions that have more cherished and really went deep into, you know, have had meditation as a practice, and maybe even never called it that way. So in that way, I would never even dare to say I have the right answer for what is meditation. You know, maybe I have to say this with a caveat. So everything I say, take it with a pinch of salt. And yet, if we want to categorize meditation, one way to look at it is meditation is just a sophisticated way to train your mind, and then there's different ways to train your mind, right? And yeah, and the first categorization or the first category would be like this one of focused attention. And if you look at TM, mantra meditation, anything where your mind is focused on one thing is exactly training that. So what are you training? You're actually training your awareness, and then you're also training the awareness of your awareness, so your meta awareness. So like, where's my mind when I'm focusing? And this is kind of, it gives you the superpower. But then there's also another different thing that trains something completely different. It's training kind of your capacity to, your plasticity of your mind, and you're constructing your worldview in a way. So if you take a chakra meditation, Tonglen, metta, all those practices are constructing and helping you to reorient your scripts in life to perceive the world in a nicer way, you know. So where and that's a completely different practice. And this is why we can really say this is a second cluster. And then the third one is really that field of metacognition. And it's maybe also where Felix enters when he enters a deep Zen state. And maybe when we talk about those states, those are mostly absorptions that happen post-focused attention. Dzogchen training, you know, any kind of self-inquiry, Ramana Maharshi, etc. Those are all kind of deconstructive practices, you know. So they are deconstructing the way you perceive the world in a healthy scientific way, because in a way, what you're doing is you're getting rid of false self-identifications. And I don't know Osho's book, but maybe we can try to point those things in there. I assume most are on the focus attention part. And yet, once we take that word meditation, we can take it all different words, you know, all different ways. And I don't know, any kind of practice can be called a meditation nowadays. And maybe we take it at that, or we don't accept it. It's not up to me. Felix, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to bring in the theme of the night, the debunking meditation. I really liked also the overview that you brought, and looking at the categorization of different kinds of meditation. You mentioned or summarized it as a training of the mind, and you use the gym metaphor. I think I'd like to just to point out that so the training aspect, training of the mind, is a story of meditation that is as relative, and you also had your disclaimer before, as the traditional version. It's it's a spiritual practice for others, and this is very great or big in society. And comes the commodification, stress relief, well-being, and so on and so forth. So I find it quite interesting that we, now that meditation comes into the mainstream, have these parallel narratives about what meditation is all about and what it is good for. And yeah, of course, I in my business practice operate with the training functional metaphor as well. For instance, I'm at the moment also training student teams in the innovation practice of design thinking. And in that context, I present meditation both from teamwork, communication, empathy, resilience, creativity point of view. But of course, if you would ask me starting my meditation practice after school when I did my social service in an elderly care organization, and was really desperate about what's the meaning of life and what is this all about. That came more from the unique question of why all of that. Who am I? What is this? Why? And I feel there's value in all of these stories, and in that sense, challenging also. And we had this conversation at the beginning, the debunking aspect or the debunking part in the topic, the theme of the night. Is it debunking, or is it different levels of application and different stories for different audiences? And the main question for me, the most important question, is what is it good for? How can it help? And where can't it help? And where certain stories lead us into maybe into a direction where we cannot move forward, or where things get too shallow, or where it is an invitation to then do the next step that is more deep or more in line, maybe, let's say, with traditional approaches. If you have this as a reference.
Okay. I think I want to just jump in again one more time, as like when I say, for example, training the mind, I think we're often having kind of this understanding of the mind as just your brain. But what we're starting with when we train meditation is just we're becoming an inner scientist. So we look down, and then we actually try to examine all different parts of minds. So that kind of brings us back to the question of what is mind, right? And that also brings us to the question of what is perception, etc. So in some ways, our mind, and that's the new way of looking at it, is not only the brain, it's as well our senses. It's also our body's intelligence, our interoception, and what Damazi would call like the your somatic markers, your intuition. That is as well your mind, And then of course it's your emotions, and how your emotions sometimes color your life and your mental activities. But it's also how the outside world. So the five senses, your interior interoception, like your interior intuition, your mental activities, but there's also the outside world and how I actually relate and how the outside world connects with me. So this is not something we only train on the cushions. It's what we do every day. It's how we make life, how we make use of this world, right? Or like how we walk through life. And I find this is a practice that in some ways it encompasses everything, because we're actually looking at perception per se and how we can make more sense and have a nicer way, being almost a connoisseur of this thing that we call life, right? And I find that so beautiful. And this is kind of this new idea of mind. Hey, it's not only we're not people that are just carrying around our brains, like we are embodied. Our body, every inch of our body is a cell of intelligence that keeps giving us information. And it's also like, I cannot be myself without you right now looking at me, and without Alistair's glasses staring, stoically with a smart smile on me, So I am constructing myself through looking at you. And this is like our connection, everything I am is emerging in this dialogue. So when I say training the mind, I also just mean is like this kind of, wow, I'm alive. What does that mean? and how can I just make this more juicy, flavorful, powerful, and how I can just be more in love with this, you know?
I would throw in a dash of intensity in the discussion, and I will quote myself or tell a tiny story about myself. The thing is, when I did meditate maybe for 8 years, and I had like very intense peak experiences, and I thought myself to be very clever and smart. We're now in my mid-20s, right? I became very painfully actually aware that just me having these enlightening peakness, oneness, Godhead, Kundalini, whatever, let's say, extraordinary experiences did not make my life functional, which is why I very consciously, after having read Ken Wilber and diving a little bit into the literature, started to complement my meditative practice with psychotherapy. So this is a long story, but the, let's say, intensity that I want to throw into the room in between the three of us, that almost my hypothesis would be that if you only meditate, even if you apply various meditation techniques, you can be very highly enlightened, but not necessarily be very functional. So it seems that the wisdom and the beauty and the richness of all these sometimes thousands of years old techniques can't really touch upon a part what we would call like the shadow of the psyche or trauma and something like that. And yeah, I'm just curious to listen in where you have also, yeah, made some of these experiences in your tradition or in the various traditions that you touched on, and what would your recommendations be to that?
Felix?
Yeah, as mentioned, I have been practicing meditation mainly in the tradition of Zen, both the Japanese and Korean. And there, of course, I had the opportunity to observe it both outside and also within myself. That the forms of the practice and the meditation, don't address a lot of the things that I feel important in my life. Beyond meditation, emotions. You mentioned being functional, relating to other people, and maybe this is part of the reason is that the meditation practices were conducted mainly in monastic contexts, and there you had a certain intensity, and everybody was under one roof, and everybody can see each other all the time, and then you had a close relationship with a teacher, master, what have you, and there are a lot of things could be included within the context of that monastery or that practice community. Now, especially becoming lay or having meditation as a lay phenomenon, secular phenomenon, it becomes difficult because meditation, as you mentioned, doesn't address psychological aspects, particularly aspects of the psychology of modern individualistic people. And yeah, from my own experience, I also did some psychotherapy, but for me, it mainly showed up in the question of how am I connected with my heart. And I mentioned that I then turned or brought in prayer and heart meditation. And interestingly, I didn't get to the loving kindness meditation of Buddhism, but had another tradition supplementing that aspect of my meditation practice, which is coming from Zen, very, very minimalistic, and it's just looking at the mind, looking at the self, and with that, not really having a good vehicle to look at psychological stuff, because the focus is mainly on what is below or beyond the psychological. So recommendation is, if you ask me, yeah, it is to complement the meditation practice, or have a look at whether the meditation practice, the tradition that you're engaged in, have a lot of intersubjective relational aspect, the more feminine qualities of being. And yeah, don't become too rigid in your meditation practice. So that would be a good indicator first, when to complement it and then how to. Nicholas.
I am currently in a meditation and study retreat with Stephen Batchelor and his wife. So some of the old Jedi masters of meditation. And I'm also in one of the largest libraries for kind of meditation and kind of contemplative books. And it's a really beautiful space that smells like library. I would not say that it smells nice, but it smells like library. Which kind of brings me to, why do we meditate? It's to have a richer, deeper life. And if we look at the life of the Buddha, I think 600 years before Christ, at the same time with Socrates, right? Meditation was a part of the teaching, and in some ways, he was one of the most successful cognitive psychologists or therapists at the time. He looked at what are the problems of people at the time, and then answered in their own way, in their own language, with sometimes more stories than anything else. So, which is, let's move on. Like, if we look at the history of meditation traditions, it's always like going between theory and practice. For example, some went too cognitive, or too much in the brain, too much theoretical, and then, like in China, and then out of that Chan developed, that was kind of a more, let's get back to practice kind of tradition, that from this on Zen developed. So in some ways we always have this dichotomy between, we should be more on the brainy side and go to the theory of it and see what is an ethical life and so on. And there's also the practice approach of it, where you say, okay, if you don't practice, it's not worth it. So the joy of meditation is kind of this, is you go inside, and if you really look into a room full of meditators, it might look like super calm, but if you would look into the minds of the people, it would be more like a boxing match that they have with themselves. So it's like a silent boxing place where many different boxing matches are happening in the same time. So only through or with meditation you can kind of get to a baseline, or really understand, hey, where am I right now? And you can sometimes go even underneath it, something that in yogic tradition we call nirodha parinama, kind of I'm going through the washing machine of going through a space where actually I can see my thoughts, I can see the roots of my thoughts, but I don't identify with them. And that in deep training can give you to really altered states. But in an everyday life, what happens here is you can get faster to baseline. You can get faster into that state where you can, like, that capacity to realize, am I actually above the line? Am I open to receive right now? Or am I below the line? And below the line, if I work a lot, I'm often below the line, which means that I answer then from a place where my heart is closed, where I actually am just talk from my ego, and I take decisions that are not so nice, And so meditation helps me in the everyday life to get faster to baseline, or to even locate myself. Am I below or above? And that, I think, is the contribution of this practice. And if I wouldn't train, I would be more often below the line and just entering drama cycles again and again. So it kind of helps me to get out of it. But in order to live a successful life, I don't think that's enough. I don't think meditation is enough. I don't even think reading theory and contemplating it is enough. Sometimes it's a therapy. Other times it's a coaching, and I think above all it's training how to be with humans. So relational competences that make a successful, beautiful life.
I want to touch upon the mentioned above or below the line. So I would tend to say that I perceive my daily meditative practice mainly to better find and fine-tune that what I would call baseline, as you mentioned it, and to be better aware of the amplitudes, both in the say beautiful peak experience, oneness with everything, or hugging a tree and being one with the tree, whatever, to the more, would not necessarily say depressed, but maybe overwhelmed or exhausted states. So translating that into a question, since I know we all three of us have a very dedicated and many years long meditative practice, what are stages of development that we could describe for someone that is just starting the journey or deepening the journey? And what are the fruits of meditation? I'm curious to listen into these two aspects.
Felix, you want to go?
At the moment, I feel that this question was a little too abstract for myself to connect to. So I hand it over to you.
So where does the meditative journey go, and where does it start? Usually it starts with, oh shit, I'm stressed, I need to do something, and then you start to breathe, and then you start to self-regulate. So we start with self-regulation. We learn to regulate ourselves, and we take ownership. The two factors of self-regulation is monitoring, and once I monitor, like scanning the body or something else, I can modify. So I can regulate, I can take ownership again of my life, which some people actually, when they talk about meditation or mindfulness, as, they talk about it as something negative, as like, oh no, when they're stressed, they just apply meditation on it. And therefore it's just, putting kind of it's like putting lipstick on a pig. But actually it's a different thing. It's actually giving people agency again over their nervous system, over how they perceive the world. And so we're starting with self-regulation, but then we move on to something else. So once you're in the self-regulation mode and you're like, oh, this is actually quite interesting, you're entering self-exploration. And when you're entering self-exploration, this mode of, I took this from a 2013 paper, but I find it so nice because it's kind of I'm exploring how my mind works, how everything works, and it becomes a joyful process. So you're like, why do I need to be outside when being inside is super cool? Like there's this Buddhist concept of piti, for example, where the piti is kind of the joy before having even a sensual experience. So you find the joy inside, so you don't need to look for it outside. But then you move from self-regulation to self-exploration to self-transcendence. And self-transcendence can be, we can make it large and use all the big words like awakening and so on, but even feeling compassion is already compassioning with someone is a feeling where you feel in a transcendent state. And at times you really reach deeper states where actually we can call them altered states, and there's different categorization system. And if you're a avid meditator, it's kind of, some people, there are states like the jhana states where like even like you feel like a Dragon Ball Z kind of Son Goku, where you collect those different states and then you compare them and put post-its on them. But that's later on the journey of having experience of self-transcendence. But what I just want to say is like the journey starts with, oh, I need to regulate myself. And then you have this kind of conversations with people about, hey, I feel stressed and so on. And you give them the tools to kind of explore by themselves. And this is what I think the beginning of mindfulness is. And this is where also this conversation about, is mindfulness bad? Is mindfulness, you look on a burger and it says breathe. Is that a bad thing per se? I personally don't think it's a bad thing. Why? Because actually people start to get interested, and if they're interested, they go further down the line, and at times they get lost in the jungle of mindfulness. And that's where people like Felix or Alistair, you and I, we come and hopefully help people to find their own path and their own way in this jungle,
Just a technical comment, since Nicholas, I know you're wearing your lavalier mic at the lower left or right, and when you're touching it, often with your gestures, it makes like funny noises.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm often more goofy than I'm Rafiki.
All good. Let's put a little bit more intensity in the middle of the room, because I truly have the feeling, when I was preparing for this, right, for now a month or so, I want to really riff off the commodification aspect. So I'm not an activist. I certainly know that in my very own personal journey, I did not start meditation as a means to relieve stress or be more functional. For me, it was pretty classical, like I think like millions of others before me, or billions, I don't know. I was reading Hermann Hesse Siddhartha, and I really had this, I mean, I did not know anything about anything, right? I was like 15 and a half or something like that. And I really had this damn, like this dude, this like Buddha guy, he's like up to something. I want to wake up. So, and this obviously does not have to do with anybody being functional, right? I mean, just if we quote some of the biggest saints and now very popular also in the West, like Ramana Maharshi, was he functional in a Western sense, right? Was he living a very integrated life, or was Ramakrishna or Sri Aurobindo, were they very integrated? I think these examples of, let's call them enlightened, awake, certainly pretty strong characters, right? I don't think they were so much about most of the aspects that I think are primarily sold on the market, which are as a means to relieve stress, be more successful, earn more money, have a better life. So let's riff off the wish to wake up, Felix. I'm really curious on that, because
I mean, in the beginning, I said, the question is whether any particular narrative of meditation it becomes a problem for you at some point in life. And there are obviously different reasons why to start a meditation. You laid out a path, Nicholas, and Alistair, you told your story. I briefly mentioned mine, and that was also more around, in a very existential question. And then during the following years of practice and finding my way, other aspects of meditation became then more relevant, or I could were more obvious to myself as beneficial. So I guess the real question is, when is it helpful to have a certain narrative, and when transcend it and move beyond? And the problem with commodification is, to put it like headspace, meditation apps, and so on and so forth. It can leave out a deeper dimension, and if you don't stumble across, let's say, a meditation practice, or a practitioner or a teacher that represents these deeper elements of meditation, you may get stuck in these more functional, let's say, approaches to these practices. But in general, and I said this before the interview, I'm not critical to modification in per se. I think this can be a good entry point to meditation practices. Yeah, the question is, where does it stop, and are you aware of the next possible steps, how to deepen your meditation practice, or maybe to shift the narrative? And I myself had a particular starting point. You had your starting point, and Nicholas, I would be interested to bring a personal note. Would you share how you started meditation, in addition to the inspiration with your teacher, your professor in Japan?
Yeah, I went into different retreats, and also different traditions. Really, there was one.
Why?
There was
Why?
The why.
Why?
The why. Felix, was it the why or what I did?
The why, not the what.
Okay, I can tell you one thing. I entered this room of my professor that was like a shabby little university room, and there was this guy with gray hair, and there he was, and there was something resonating from him. And then he said, I don't know, we sat down and he said, be grateful for life, for every detail of it. And soon your face will start to shine like the sun, and everyone that sees it will become glad and peaceful. And then he told us that this was Rumi, and then he took us on this journey from, hey, there's this idea of dualism where you and an object are different things, but there's a lot of cool, wise people levitating from different traditions. They say, actually, you can feel a sense of oneness, and it's a lot of fun. And I felt that in my heart. So in a way, that became more interesting than all the other things I had in mind at that time, which was mostly food, photography, and women, and kind of naively thinking that I could change the world or something like this, So that's the why, and a deep curiosity, because I love those texts, like if you ever stumble upon a translation by Stephen Mitchell of the Tao, it's just like, I don't get it, but it just it just resonates deeply. There is something, and then you work, you chew. It's not like the Western idea of, I have a book, I've read it and I put it back. No, it's like like an old school chewing gum that you chew it and then you put it, I don't know, and then you put it back again. Okay, actually, that's not how chewing gums ever worked, but yeah. So in a way, the joy, there's something that felt true, right? And that's where I think when we start the commodification, or when we are in a space of commodification as well, right? Calm, headspace, etc. They have their benefits, but there's also maybe the negative side is that people think that is meditation. And it's and also we even have a commodification of retreats. People go on a Gwenka retreat, and after 10 days they think they're expert at something. Like, where in which category in the world where you just watch VHS videos of a dude for 10 days, you think that you're an expert at something, you know? So it just shows how we are really at the beginning, as well as a society, to use those new technologies that can help us to more agency, to more ownership of our lives, but we're still at the beginning. And I kind of noticed that there's almost like 4 different categories, and it starts with like this Mac mindfulness, like you look on that burger and like, oh, you know, breathe in, breathe out, eat the Big Mac, put it back down, no? And then you move on, that was nice, let me now try Headspace. And then you try it out and you're like, oh, that's super cool, I like that. And then you enter the 3rd stage, is that like, it's that the stage of the cool hip yoga teacher, you know? So you maybe had some experiences and then you share on Instagram with other people, you know? And then you maybe want to go even deeper, and then you enter, I don't know, you go, you ordain as a monk, or you try different things out, you know? It's that, it kind of, if you're curious, it goes down that path, right? And so the commodification is can only be bad if we only stay at the first 2 stages. But if a society slowly moves down, it's a beautiful thing, you know.
And bringing in also mindfulness in the business world, there may be a boss that wants to have his employees, his co-workers, to be more efficient, more effective, and thinks that letting them meditate is a good thing for that. Of course, this would be a manipulative move on his side, but being exposed to these practices, even at the lower levels that you mentioned it, Nicholas, has some effect and changes them and moves them forward. And if they are exposed to these other levels, they may choose to go deeper, and it's not harmful in that way. So that's not the problem of commodification, that it's harmful. I think the problem can be, as we agreed in the last couple of minutes on, getting stuck on a limited understanding.
And there's the funny thing with like mindfulness trainings for organization is like one of the most common mindfulness kind of criticism is that that people, once they start to do those mindfulness trainings, they're just being pushed into just being more effective. But the funny thing is, once you go and do mindfulness trainings for organizations that are a bit more dysfunctional, it's just the people that are in there are just realizing, hey, this is shit, and I'm just going out. So if you are an organization where you actually, your heart is not at the right place, maybe think twice before you hire a mindfulness trainer, or not, I don't know. So actually, it's again this, let's put agency back into, let's give agency back to the people. And I see this kind of shift as well as in our kind of understanding of how society works. Like, so sociologists like Hartmut Rosa that kind of say it's not only about how much money people have and so on, it's about how much they enter a resonance with things, that determines if they live a happy, fulfilled life. And this kind of turn into how we perceive things and give back agency to people is very beautiful to witness right now.
I want to introduce a headline, actually a couple of headlines, and I will start with spiritual bypassing and give one example out of that book from Robert Augustus Masters that I read a couple of times, and that definitely for me, and I passed it on to many, many people, was a pretty life-changing. And the example goes a little bit, I will stretch it a little bit further than in the book, is like, if you meditate and you have a friend that meditates and you perceive your friend as if that friend was truly going through some tough times, let's say maybe he lost a person due to death or out of a relationship, and actually you, as his close friend or her friend, have the feeling this person should really grieve or be maybe feel a certain tension in the system. But when you ask that person, you know, like, how do you feel, this person would give you a very Instagrammy, oh, everything is good. Or as a guy, nein, alles gut, everything good. So it almost seems that people that do only meditate have certain character traits be overlooked. And to finish that intro and then hand over to you, and I'm really curious to hear some examples from your experience and background, is I was not even able to feel anger up until maybe a handful of years ago, because it seems that this feeling or the process of feeling angry and setting healthy boundaries was so tightly locked and buried that it actually took quite a while to unlock a healthy response of clear boundaries, and sometimes a healthy response of anger instead of like sitting it all away and smiling it all away. So this is one example out of spiritual bypassing, and I'm curious to listen in if you know the concept, and what are your experiences of spiritual bypassing in the various backgrounds, or just that one background, Felix, that you have with Buddhism, Zen Buddhism.
I mean, and I shared the story with you in person, privately. Yeah, this practice path, a more traditional practice path, can work for some people, and they can blossom in it, and that's it. And at the same time, if you have, and you mentioned the concept of shadows, and maybe to add to this, trauma that's in your life, it can be hard, even if you have, Nicholas, you put it, having the baseline of witnessing what's going on. It can be very hard and even destructive in your life, because the shadows, traumas, you usually don't have, and you indicated this in your case with anger. You don't have access to that, and then it can be really destructive, especially if your entire environment tells you, now you have to meditate more intensively and just stick with it. And I had in my context with the Zen tradition, examples of people that used the really intense and pure form, sometimes strict form of Zen meditation practice to reenact their Catholic traumas, and to feel miserable and to hurt their own bodies. In other cases, psychotic, depressive people, alcoholic people, that were suggested that just meditating more would be the solution, and it obviously didn't seem like that, at least to me. And so spiritual bypassing is very, very easy for oneself practicing, because meditation in itself is a form of stabilization. But if this stabilization isn't, you don't use the stabilization for looking very closely at yourself, and then letting go of control, allowing whatever come up, the washing machine that you mentioned, Nicholas, and have it as the basis, as the vessel, to have a chemical image for the transformation, for the healing. It only gets a mean to stabilize the status quo for yourself, namely being dissociated from the pain, from the hurt, from trauma, from shadow material. Then it gets really problematic for yourself. And if you are then in a community that forces this by telling you, yeah, meditate more, or it's something about your bad ego that you struggle and let go of the ego, then it gets even more severe, and sometimes, in my estimation, can be really, really destructive. And what are some of your experiences, Nicholas?
Yeah, no, I love that. One of the pillars of, like, or the three pillars of good meditation are focused attention, open awareness, and kind intention. And I think especially with the last one, we really struggle also to cultivate it within ourselves. Kind intention, and especially in traditions where just a hard practice is being, is being seen as the one thing that can really help you. I find this often, and there are quite a lot of stories of people that go into a kind of tradition where there's kind of a harshness there, and then and they're being, and they see certain childhood traumas kind of being taken on and taking their own role, and even abuses of power, etc. And this is why I find it there is a danger of getting lost in this jungle of mindfulness. And I personally think there's 4 things that are really important. The one is waking up, or like having great experiences and training your mind and regulating yourself. But then there's also the growing up, like, you have to actually kind of lift your, you have to kind of move up with your, now that you see more, you have to also grow up as a person. And then you have to clean up. And that also sometimes means like, oh, wait a second, I see my own traumas, or I see my own vulnerabilities. Hey, can I now go can I clean this up, maybe with someone who's a professional? And then there's the 4th part, which I find even more important, is the show up. Is like, how can I then show up for others? And it's so easy. It is so easy to see spiritual bypassing in other people. It's so almost impossible to see it in yourself. So you need to get good people around you that can tell you, hey, honestly, that was not the right answer right now, but if you really do it right, it just, looking into yourself means becoming more human. So, for example, in the last 2-3 years, I've kind of made friends, and I became even more accustomed to see jealousy, anger, and especially anger arising, and pity, self-pity. And so in some ways I became more friends with it, and if people shared about their experiences, I became more curious about it. So I feel like even if if you train meditation, whatever, sometimes you're only 5 minutes ahead at times in terms of self-regulation, but that doesn't make you less human. Even it makes you even more perceptive to emotions and so on. So I feel like I became more vulnerable even through that, and but also far more curious about, like, I don't know if other people experience things that are so deeply human.
I don't really know. So it feels like almost like a good wrapping of the whole conversation, this like waking up. So this aspect to wake up to enlightenment, the eternal nature of every moment, born from now into now into now. So the waking up moment, the growing up part, which I would say is definitely like this more mundane experience of us not living in a monastic setting. Most of us have to earn money, live relationships, get to grips with a healthy sexuality or whatever. The cleaning up part, which I feel refers mainly to the shadow aspects of our psyche, be it addiction, abuse, trauma, or also abusing others, and then the showing up part. So I have the feeling if we stay with these four mentioned aspects towards the end of our dialogue, I really have the feeling this could be one of the takeaways for our audience. And maybe in between these like four, I would not say it feels more like four parts of a wheel because they are all intertwined. Are there some recommendations that you give? Because I will give some recommendations, but I will hand over to either Felix or Nicolas to comment on that.
No really comment because these what I mentioned are quite a good summary. More a question about what do we feel? How does this relate to the initial question that we started with about debunking meditation?
I'm happy to go with that, but maybe Nicolas wants to go first.
Yeah, I think the showing up part is so beautiful. Is we shouldn't like today Stephen Batchelor gave a beautiful lecture to us about the life of the Buddha, and it seems like if we reconstruct what this man was about, it was all about almost Obama-like going into communities, constructing communities, helping people of all different paths, and sorts, and from drunk yards to that guy who has the pigs, etc. 3 monks that wouldn't even listen to him, so he just walk away. So it's kind of actually it's that if you have a little bit of, I don't know, if there's something you can help to assist others, go out there and do something. Don't go away and do a crazy Instagram post where you're bitching about the world. No, try to understand how the world works, and talk with scientists, experts, whatever, and especially become an expert of your own field and help out. Everything else is just like, what the fuck are you even doing? And I think that's my biggest problem right now with the spiritual community is like, are you a change for the better or not? And my mother, who's the least spiritual person in the world, is a nurse who's helping people right now. I don't know, ever since I grew in my childhood till now, and she's now in a retirement home, she's helping people just ease until the end of life. And there's never been a sentence or a word about, I don't know, going away from this responsibility. And I sometimes hear the grand words and blah, 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 from people in the spiritual world. But I lack this action of going and helping people where it's needed, And I think there's 3 fingers pointing back to me when I say those things. And I might be failing in that regard most of the times as well, It's just, I find the most important part of all.
I don't know if it's already the closing words, but I'm obviously like the most polemic guy in the room of the 3 of us. So debunking meditation for me definitely means that sugarcoating bullshit in the literal sense. So you have bullshit and then you put sugarcoat on it, doesn't make it like truly like more meaningful. I don't think that injecting more mindfulness, even if it's a layer deeper of mindfulness into, for example, companies that by definition already have an extractive business model. I mean, I advocate as an agent for radical systemic change, really makes sense, unless that obviously these people come to grips with the fact that they're supporting an extractive business model and leaving the company or changing the business model. So that's definitely like one thing that I want to put in the middle. Secondly, the recommendation for maybe counterintuitively people that do a lot of meditation, and they become, for example, a coaching client. Usually I tell them, stop meditating for a bit, do psychotherapy, that's it, right? On the other hand, if people come from with a background of like psychotherapy and they have like looked a lot into their shadow, muddy, murky, depressed, contracted parts, you know, then I say, maybe you stop therapy for a moment and you gather some beautiful peak experiences and oneness experiences. And I really had, I don't know if it's a big aha moment, but when Nicholas was talking about this waking up, growing up, cleaning up, showing up, it literally feels almost like a wheel with 4 parts, where sometimes we're at different stages in our life, and sometimes we need to focus more on certain aspects. And to finish that off, it almost feels like closing words. I certainly have this feeling after having done a lot of waking up, a lot of growing up, and a lot of cleaning up in the last 14 years or so. For me, my focus is primarily showing up. This does not mean I don't continue the cleaning up or growing up or part, but for me in my life phase is definitely most about the showing up. For others, it might be exactly the opposite. They had a lot of showing up, so maybe it's time to clean up a bit or grow up a bit. Yeah, happy to hand
Felix,
over.
Thanks, Alistair. I would love to hear your. Do you want to say the last words and your take on debunking and maybe some suggestions? I'd be super curious.
Yeah, I'd leave it with Ali's closing word, and yeah, just want to thank you for the conversation, guys. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you, guys. That was really beautiful, and I hope to, 3 Germans speaking in English.
3 Germans with a brutal German accent now closing. Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, Felix.
Jawohl.
And there's more to talk about it another time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Buonanotte, everyone. Ciao.